So in this episode, I'm going to share with you a system I came up with to help my students learn how to do scales in a really sensible way. One of the most common things that I found with young players when they're trying to learn scales is their instinct is always to try and do it on the instrument. So, and this makes perfect sense. So you're learning to play the clarinet and you want to learn how to play B major, let's say. You reach for your instrument and you start trying to play the scale. But what I've discovered is that because the clarinet is particularly complex because of the way that it overblows at the 12th, we don't have a repetition of the fingerings that we have in the lower register like you do on other instruments. There is an added complication because of this overblowing at the 12th, which means that more often than not, one of the most common errors that is made is in the upper register. The young players, or any player, I keep saying young players, but anybody who's learning scales, they try and recreate the same finger patterns that they've done in the lower register, in the upper register, and this doesn't work. There are only a few scales where actually if you repeat the same fingers that you just used in the low register, in the upper register, you'll find that they work. So what I came up with was a way of learning scales that would always work. And this involves some background knowledge, of course. You have to know in the first place what is in your scale, so how many sharps or flats are on the key signature, and that's a given. So there are things that we can do to help remember those. So the mnemonic that I use for sharps, for example, for particularly with young players, is Father Christmas gave Dad an electric blanket. And for the flats, blanket explodes and Dad gets cold feet. Now that's quite a good thing to remember, and kids can usually get the handle of that. So you've got your F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, B sharp. Father Christmas gave Dad an electric blanket, and then the flats. So you have to know that in the first instance. So that's one thing to know. But I came up with a system which I called Say, Show, Play. And I use this all the time, and I've used it for many years, and I know that it works really well. And it's a way of learning your scales or building on solid foundations so that you're actually planning what you're going to do rather than switching your brain off and not really thinking about what you're doing at the time that you're playing on your instrument. Again, so what I discovered is that for the most part, even if you've got that knowledge, if you've done your Father Christmas gave Dad an electric blanket and then you start playing the scale, what most people do is they switch their brains off at that point. They recognise the key signature, and then, as it were, they step off the curb and they leave all of that information behind on the curbside as they cross over the road and they make a mistake. So Say, Show, Play, which is what I want to talk about today, is a way of learning scales that I know works because it's a progressive learning process. So in the first instance, what that means is you have to say the scale out loud. And this builds on the idea that, or the knowledge that every scale, we're talking about major and minor scales here, every scale has to have one of every letter. So we use A to G, 7 letters. Those are the only letters that we use. And we go from A up to G, and then when we get to G, we repeat again. So we're using words, the letters of the alphabet when we're playing music. And this is often forgotten. Or it's treated in such an abstract way that young people don't even realise that's the case. So what is a scale? First of all, you need to know that there is one of every letter. The reason that we have some of these more difficult things to remember, like let's say A sharp rather than B flat, which is the same note, is because of where it comes in the sequence of sharps. So B flat is the first flat, whereas A sharp is the 5th sharp in the order. So you don't tend to come across A sharp unless you're playing in B minor or you're playing in B major, which is 5 sharps or 2 sharps if you're playing B major, B minor. So in the first instance, we use these 7 letters, and we have to use every one of those 7 letters in a scale. We can't miss any out. we can't say any twice. So those are two crucial facts that if you start off when you're learning scales, you remember that each letter follows the preceding one in the way that you would say an alphabet. So if we take A major, for example, if we know that A major has 3 sharps and we use Father Christmas gave to work out that they are F, C and G, that's your starting point. And then what you've got to do is you've got to say the scale out loud. So you say the scale out loud, plugging in those sharps, F, C and G, in the right places. So you'd simply say A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. Crucially then you have to say it down again or backwards, and that's the thing that lots of people find difficult because they've got to think about the alphabet going backwards. So we start at A again, G sharp, F sharp, E, D, C sharp, B, A. So we do that maybe a couple of times just so that we get used to realizing where the notes, how the notes are one next to each other and where the sharps are. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, G sharp, F sharp, E, D, C sharp, B, A. So that's relatively straightforward for a scale like A major. Obviously if maybe you've got E flat major and you're starting halfway through the alphabet, you know you've got to double back on yourself and go back to A. So this needs practice. So E flat major has 3 flats, B flat, E flat, A flat, blanket, explodes, and. So we go E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat, back down again, D, C, B flat, A flat, G, F, E flat. So that's sort of stage 1, is taking your knowledge of what is in each scale and applying it to the alphabet and saying that backwards and forwards. That's the say part of say, show, play. So show is now where we apply it to the instrument. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to start playing straight away, because playing the instrument is much more complicated than just using your mind to remember what note comes next and telling your fingers where they're going next. And this is the crucial step I think that is often missed out, is when we're learning a scale, we pick up our instrument and we start playing, we start on the correct note, but we don't bring that information with us necessarily. We don't remember that if it's E flat major, it's got an A flat and a B flat as well as the E flat. And we start on the scale and we haven't thought about anything beyond maybe the first 3, 4 notes, if we're lucky, let alone what we might need to do at the top in terms of fingerings that we might be looking at. So having done say correctly and comfortably and with confidence, then we want to build on that confidence by looking at show. So show involves saying the notes again and then showing the fingers after you've said the notes. So you're telling yourself what fingers to put down. So I'm going to go back to A major and I'll show you what I mean. So A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, G sharp, F sharp, E, D, C sharp, B, A, G sharp, F sharp, E, D, C sharp, B, A. So that was my 2-octave scale of A major, and I'm always thinking about what note comes next and then moving my fingers. You can do them at the same time, A, B, C sharp, D, so long as you're telling yourself what comes next. That crucially is what I found is what people don't do, is they don't think ahead, they don't plan. They're going on a journey and they go, oh right, I'm going to go from here to here, but I'm not even going to think about how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to step outside the front door and I'm just going to start walking and hope that I'm going in the right direction. That's going to take you much longer in the long run, okay? So you've done say and you've done show. Then the next thing you can do is that hopefully you can then try and keep those things in mind as you start to play it. And you're saying the letters in your head. This is just at the first, as you're learning the scale. As time goes by, you're going to have this magical thing called muscle memory, which is what a lot of young players, they say this to me and say, yes, but I do it and I get muscle memory. And I go, well, how are you going to get muscle memory? What does that mean? That means that you've planned your route so carefully that you remember it straight away. from one practice to the next. If you're lucky to have a really good memory like that, then it may take you, all it takes, that was today, 10 minutes to go say, show, play. So I'm now going to play A major. So having said it and showed it, then I can play it. So if you do this with, you can do this with any scale, obviously. And I've used this technique for many years now after I came up with it with pupils, and perhaps teaching them scales that they've never done before to try and demonstrate to them how useful it is. So, you know, if you're suddenly having to try and learn something tricky like G sharp harmonic minor, which involves double sharps, which in itself is quite a complicated idea to get around. Why isn't it just a G? Because we can only have one of every letter, and we have to have one of everyone, and we can't miss any out. So again, this idea of reinforcing this idea about what a scale is and why it is, and when you're looking at it on the page, that might make sense. But as scales are generally something that we need to learn from memory, this is my way of trying to work it out and learn it. And I think this is a really, really important lesson to learn for all kinds of learning situations when you're learning an instrument, particularly one as complicated as the clarinet. Clarinet's very common as an instrument, but because it overblows at the 12th, those patterns that we have in the lower register do not repeat. So as you can see in the upper register, if you do let's say A flat major, so we start A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat. So A flat, B flat, C and D flat return, but we have to know where our fingers are going to be. And there are some scales, particularly ones that actually we come across quite early, where we don't have that luxury of the fingers repeating. So, for example, you might have B minor, which starts B, C sharp, D, E. Now in the upper register, it doesn't go F sharp, G sharp. So we have that problem of the fingers that you start in the lower register, B, C sharp, are then replaced by F sharp and G. One of those notes has the same fingering, but the next one isn't. So one of the most common mistakes in B minor in the upper register is that people try and play G sharp after the F sharp. And that's not in the scale, and that's because of repeating. So I hope that will help both for teachers and pupils when you're trying to learn scales. And the main lesson to take from this really is that if you work at things in stages, so build your confidence from the ground up. The most important thing to do, first of all, is gain confidence in one thing. If you know that a scale has to have one of every letter, and you can't miss any out, can't say any twice, and you say the scale out loud, then you know that's the scale. And you can do that walking along the road in the morning, on your way to school. You can do that, you know, as you come back, as you're on the bus, coming home from work. You can be thinking your scales, and you can even be thinking about the fingers without even needing your instrument there in your hands. You can be thinking about where those notes are on the instrument. So it's preliminary work, or work done away from the instrument, that is invaluable. So that's my method: say, show, play.